Time of the week when I'm joined by Mike Gallagher, congressman from Wisconsin. And unfortunately, he has chosen this week to appear without any sports garb because he knew this is really the week we're celebrating the return of Big Ten football, which means the Ohio State Buckeyes. But Congressman Gallagher doesn't want to wear the red this week because it was Wisconsin Chancellor Rebecca Blank yesterday who threw cold water on the Big Ten coming back. Congressman Gallagher, why is Wisconsin stopping the return of Big Ten football?
I don't know, Hugh. Well, first of all, let's pause and just recognize that Aaron Rodgers is back, 4 touchdowns, essentially a perfect passer rating,
Such a
eviscerating
politician.
the Vikings.
Such a
All of your predictions
politician.
were wrong, as usual.
Such
Go
a
Pack,
politician.
go.
The tough
Uh,
question comes right at you, and you sidestep off to what is, in essence, an exhibition game around the league. First week doesn't count, it's an exhibition game. Now we'll see what happens on Thursday night with the Cleveland Browns and Baker Mayfield.
it's called a division win, Hugh, and those things tend to matter later in the season. So
You're
we'll take it.
tell,
But it is absurd. I see no reason why the Big Ten can't play football. I mean, and the way they're doing this with, I have a family members that are at various UW colleges right now, and they have the kids locked in the dorms, and they can only get meals delivered, and yet they're there, but they're doing a lot of distance learning still. It makes no sense. And I will say, while we should all be concerned about an increase in cases, to my knowledge, there hasn't been a corresponding spike in hospitalizations for that young student population. So I think it's far past time for the Big Ten to get over this, and I'm sad to see our chancellor at UW Madison feeling the opposite way.
I want to read from the report yesterday. Wisconsin Chancellor Rebecca Blank was asked about the conference indefinitely postponing the season while testifying about name, image, and likeness to the U.S. Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. There were several main reasons for that, Blank said via video conference. One was that we were uncertain that we could do the level of testing and contact tracing that was needed to keep the athletes safe. The SEC can. Secondly, this was a growing evidence about heart-related myocarditis. Notre Dame doesn't care about that, apparently, and I don't think Notre Dame is indifferent to their students. And that evidence was uncertain. That's because it doesn't exist. And it wasn't clear what it meant. That's because it didn't mean anything. And we wanted to know more. There are a few other more minor reasons, such as being politically correct. Until we have answers to that, we will keep our season postponed. Honestly, I think it's the Michigan governor and the Wisconsin chancellor, and they want to hurt the economy and the president's chances in the upper Midwest. That's brutally candid. Do you agree with me, Congressman?
Well, I don't know if it's that quite nefarious as that. I just think it's a fear-based decision. It's a general risk aversion or an unwillingness to lead. I mean, there's no perfect approach here. I mean, keeping the school completely shut down carries enormous physical, mental, and economic costs. Canceling football for the season could cost the UW system upwards of $100 million. That'll hurt students down the road, and so I think it's more just being afraid of their own shadow, and really, I would say, ironically, an unscientific approach to this that's wrapped in the name of science. I think all the things you cited are dubiously scientific at best. So I just don't understand it. And to your point, I mean, other conferences are figuring this out. We've had quarterbacks, SEC quarterbacks, point out that for many students, it's actually less healthy for them not to play football, particularly if you're sending them home to bad situations where they come from. And so the Big Ten needs to play football. We can do it safely. We can mitigate the risk. It's not going to be perfect, but the other options are imperfect as
They
well.
need to play sports, not just football. They need to play sports. And
Yeah.
they got to let some students in the stands. The Browns are playing Thursday night, as I may have mentioned a few times, and there will be 6,000 people allowed in the stands. Now, I think that's kind of a crazy number that Mike DeWine came up with. The stadium holds 70,000 people. I got 4 of the tickets, so my brother's going to the Bengals. We're going to blow out the Bengals. That'll be easy. But the Kansas City Chiefs had 16,000 fans, and the Ravens had no fans. This is clearly not science, and it's because we have a federal system. That's okay to have a federal system, but when you have a conference, they ought to be more open and they ought to be deliberating in public. I just can't believe they're doing this behind closed doors. Last comment, and I want to move on to political implications in the Mideast peace agreement yesterday, but really, shouldn't they be deliberating in front of the public? These are public universities. Don't we have a right to know what they're talking about?
They should be 100% transparent. They're not looking out for the welfare of the kids. I think they're protecting their own careers at this point. It's particularly galling because prior to this, I thought that Michigan was behind the opposition, and my wife is a Michigan grad, so I was giving her a lot of crap for
Is
this.
that a
But now
degree
it
granting
appears
institution? I didn't know that. Really? Does she have a degree from Michigan? The law school does, but I
it's
didn't know that
crazy.
Michigan actually gave those out.
There's a crayon drawing in a frame in our house somewhere.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm gonna get in
I
trouble. I
didn't
take
know
all
that
that
we
back.
had merged
Sorry.
Michigan and Wisconsin. When there are little Gallagher babies down the road, I weep for their sports knowledge. They will be completely ignorant of real sports.
Old Gallagher baby, and she's very conflicted. It's like half Michigan, half Wisconsin. All Packers though, because my wife is from Green Bay.
Well, so they won't know anything about the NFL either. Let's go to the peace agreement yesterday, Mike Gallagher. All of the conventional wisdom. You were Scott Walker's national security team. You know the national security advisor ambassador. Even though your nickname is China Mike Gallagher, you've been right on the Middle East. The president last night said, look, no one said I could get this done. I got it done. And Benjamin Netanyahu said no one said he could get it done. How surprised are you that this happened yesterday?
Well, on the one hand, not surprised because back in 2015 when I was working for Walker, I remember we were speaking to a group of Middle East focused people, and Walker and I had this whole thing where we said it's kind of the best of times, worst of times in the region. Worst of times because the Iran nuclear deal has unleashed Iranian power, but the best of times is that because that's provoked a counter reaction. There's a de facto alliance emerging between Israel and the Sunni Arab Gulf states. But I'm surprised because I never thought that someone would have the vision to take that de facto alliance and almost turn it into a de jure alliance and build on it and make it into a real thing. And I think the Trump administration in general, and Jared Kushner in particular, deserve, and our mutual friend Ambassador O'Brien, deserve enormous credit for doing that. This is particularly important because I think over the next 4 years, Iran, as it increasingly feels like it's a cornered tiger in the region, it will look for ways to strike out. And having this rapprochement between Israel and the Sunni Arab Gulf states is our best path to regional stability and avoiding further regional war. So I don't think you can understate the significance of this, though that didn't stop people like the New York Times from trying to do just that. My friend sent me an article yesterday with the New York Times article that basically tried to portray this agreement as a campaign gift to Donald Trump. And the argument was that because Trump had put his finger on the scale in the Israeli elections, that now Netanyahu was returning the favor. This is absurd. I mean, that's Trump derangement syndrome on steroids. Can't we all just come together and say this is a good thing that's happening in a region that often defies our ability to do good things? And again, I think you have to, even if you're not a fan of the White House, give them enormous credit for this amazing achievement.
Now, I want to pause for a moment. Yesterday, a story broke that the mullahs and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are threatening to assassinate America's ambassador to South Africa because she is a close friend of Donald Trump, and they want to retaliate for the killing of Soleimani, who was a battlefield general engaged in attacks on American troops and moving Hezbollah combatants to attack Americans, and they had killed Americans. A very different situation. I asked Admiral Stavridis yesterday. He said if any attack is launched on any American as a result of that, the response should be, quote, immediate and massive. That's Admiral Stavridis. What do you think about that, Congressman Gallagher? Uh-oh.
I
Have
may
we,
have lost.
well,
There you
you've
go.
off. There you are. So I will reframe that. Admiral Stavridis said yesterday, if any attack occurs on any American, especially an ambassador, the response should be immediate and massive against Tehran. What do you think?
That's right. He's absolutely right. It should be immediate. It should be massive. And I would say if they attack an American ambassador, it should not even be proportional. It should be overwhelming in our response. And so, not only taking out some of their commanders, but taking out all of their nuclear facilities in coordination with our regional allies. If they go down that road, they will be met with an overwhelming response. And I think if the administration does that, they will be given the authorization and the overwhelming support that they need by the United States Congress, because that would just be a bridge too far, even for the
Well,
Iranians.
they have threatened George H.W. Bush when he was alive, and his son in the White House at that time took immediate steps. But when I read this Politico story about targeting the ambassador because she's a friend of Trump, I thought the only way a great power can react to that is as Teddy Roosevelt reacted to the captive of our ambassador. Either we get the ambassador alive or you are dead. And I think we say that to every one of the Iranian mullahs and their generals.
I would agree with that, Hugh. The fact is, while they're very skilled at operating asymmetrically, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force is very good at using proxy forces throughout the region. This is a third-rate power that is increasingly weak economically, increasingly cornered diplomatically, and has very few friends around the world. And so, I don't think we should be intimidated by the Iranians. I think we should recognize that we have the strong hand to play, and again, building off this emerging regional framework where we are restoring relationships with our traditional allies and also fostering cooperation between non-traditional partners in the region, I think we have an even stronger hand to play. So we just can't allow ourselves to be intimidated by the Iranians. If we do, ironically, I think we'll get sucked in further into the region on unfavorable terms and find it even more difficult to pivot to the more decisive theater of operations, that's Indo-PACOM, and do the things we need to do to counter the Chinese. So the good news is I know O'Brien and others are tracking this very closely, and I do think that there would be bipartisan support for a response should the Iranians do something that stupid.
And a last question, Congressman. Joe Biden says he wants back into the JPOA. They're still holding the wake for the failed joint Iranian American arms giveaway and dollars giveaway. What do you make of that? That Joe Biden is living in the past, and we know the past is discredited.
It makes absolutely no geostrategic sense. There are in the region, our allies would not welcome that approach at all. The fact is, the Iranians were violating the JCPOA prior to Trump deciding to pull us out of it, and so all that would do is weaken our hand. And again, I think it's evidence of what we saw for 8 years, which is this desire to look inward, to reduce U.S. force posture around the world, to weaken the American military, and to extend a hand to our biggest adversaries around the world. That was the essence of the Obama-Biden foreign policy, and logic would dictate that, given 4 years in the White House, Biden would continue that failed foreign policy. We actually have a perfect sort of natural experiment here in the commander-in-chief test. We have someone who is the commander-in-chief right now, and we have someone who was vice president for 8 years. The Obama-Biden foreign policy was an absolute unmitigated disaster. It's the whole reason I ran for Congress in 2016. I watched our position crumble firsthand. I watched a vacuum emerge in the Middle East and a caliphate be carved out in the heart of the Middle East. We can't go back to that approach. And certainly when it comes to China, we can't go back to the status quo ante. We've made absolutely too much progress over the last 4 years in a bipartisan fashion, I would point out, at least in Congress. And so Biden has failed the commander-in-chief test 100%.
Congressman Gallagher, thank you. We've run out of time. You can't update me on how the Bucks are doing inside the bubble in the NBA championships. You can do that next week. I'm sure they'll be in the finals against the Lakers. I appreciate it, Congressman. Be well. Time for me. He always does the Bucks update. We don't have time for that. Time to tell you about ReliefFactor.com. We can get this to the Bucks, by the way. ReliefFactor.com. 1995 is a 3-week